You've probably played games with completely linear levels where it feels as though the designers are constantly deciding where you should go, what you should see, and how you should move through the world. Even when those levels are well made, they can sometimes feel restrictive because there is very little room to choose your own direction or decide what interests you. You've probably also played games at the opposite end of that spectrum, where an enormous open world gives you the freedom to travel almost anywhere from the beginning. That freedom can be exciting, but it can also be overwhelming. When every direction contains another landmark, activity, or objective, it is easy to lose your sense of purpose or spend more time deciding what to do rather than actually doing it. So, how to fix these issues that both of these level design frameworks present? Some games have found a structure that sits somewhere between these two experiences. Welcome to Game Design Dimension. If you like game design essays, be sure to sub the channel. So this middle ground structure is called the hub and spoke level design framework. The player is given a large central area that connects to several smaller destinations. That central area acts as the hub, while the paths and levels branching away from it become the spokes. Those spokes can contain story missions, optional dungeons, puzzles, or combat encounters. Some of them may be almost completely linear, while others may expand into secondary hubs with their own branching paths. God of War's Lake of Nine is probably one of the clearest examples of this structure. When the player first reaches the lake, the game suddenly feels much larger than the relatively linear journey that led them there. Islands, towers, shorelines, and distant landmarks are visible in several directions, and the player is given the freedom to decide which of those places they want to investigate next. Once the player reaches one of those destinations, however, the experience becomes more controlled. The surrounding areas are deliberately constructed levels containing combat, puzzles, environmental storytelling, and more carefully paced story moments. Completely linear levels give designers a great deal of control over the player's experience. They can decide which direction the player enters an area from, where enemies appear from, how the environment frames an important view, and when a story moment takes place. Mechanics can be introduced in a specific order, and the difficulty can be designed around a relatively predictable player journey. The disadvantage is that the player may feel as though they are simply following the route that has been placed in front of them. While linear levels try to reduce this feeling by creating large combat arenas, optional side paths, or multiple routes through an area, these choices can provide useful moments of player agency, but the player is still generally being guided towards the same destination. Fully open worlds approach the problem from the opposite direction. Games like Breath of the Wild allow players to choose their own goals, approach locations from multiple directions, and move through the world in an order the designers cannot completely predict. That freedom is central to what makes that game work, but the same structure would not be appropriate for every experience because it requires designers to give up some control over pacing. Players may discover important locations much earlier than expected, leave activities halfway through, or approach encounters in a way that bypasses the intended route. Hub and spoke design works by applying the strengths of each of these structures at a different scale. The hub supports exploration, navigation, and player choice, while the surrounding linear levels support more deliberate pacing, encounters, and storytelling. One of the biggest advantages of a strong hub is that it gives the player a stable point of reference. When every road connects to several other roads, it can become difficult to understand where individual locations exist in relation to the rest of the world. A strong hub reduces that cognitive load by giving the player one familiar space through which the surrounding world could be understood. In God of War, Tyr's temple becomes the player's primary reference point for much of the exploration in Midgard. The temple establishes the center of the space, and the surrounding towers and shorelines help the player understand where different destinations are located. This is also why hubs often become some of the most memorable locations in a game. Player sees the same environment repeatedly, but every journey through it is connected to a different destination. Even VR games like Asgard's Wrath 2 use a larger variation of the structure in areas like the Great Sand Sea, where a broad traversal space connects the players to dungeons, landmarks, and more controlled pieces of content. The main weakness of hub and spoke design is that the structure can eventually become too predictable. If every activity begins in the same central area, follows a separate path, and ends up by sending the player back through the same route, the experience can begin to feel repetitive. Good hub and spoke worlds avoid this by developing both the hub and the connection surrounding it as the game progresses. God of War changes the Lake of Nine by lowering the water level and revealing new beaches and pathways as the game progresses. Shortcuts that help avoid backtracking also make the structure feel less rigid. Progression abilities can achieve something similar by allowing players to access paths they noticed much earlier. To sum up, hub-and-spoke design works extremely well for games that want exploration to be an important part of the experience without building their entire world around complete openness. A game may need carefully constructed combat encounters, cinematic moments, and puzzle sequences, while also giving players the opportunity to choose destinations, discover optional content, and spend time traveling through the world at their own pace.